the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to the short version of Series 20, looking at the groups and teams of the 2023 African Cup, played in Ivory Coast in January 2024. This episode is looking at Group E: Tunisia, Mali, South Africa, and Namibia. Here we go. It's the International Soccer Preview. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Kiara. This is Series 20 of our MediaCast. It's the short version of the same series, Series 20, which looks at the groups and teams for the 2023 African Nations Cup. Even though it's titled that way, it actually takes place in January 2024.
This group is made up of Tunisia, Mali, South Africa, and Namibia. In the short version here, we're replacing parts 1 and 2 of the full-length version with a short summary of each team's history and a look at their recent form.
In the full-length version, Connor and Kevin introduced the teams in part 1 with some information about each country's location and population and so on. Part 2 is a history of each team with a deep dive into African Cup finals history. They then look into performances in recent tournaments and end with an overview of the players.
In this MediaCast, we will tag on part 3 from that full-length version, that Connor and my discussion of the prospects of each team.
So, if this short version grabs your interest, keep an eye out for the full-length version and players version, which will come out later in 2023.
Yeah, and we're also working on Series 19, which is on the groups, teams, and players of the AFC Asian Cup. And we published long and short versions of the groups and teams and are in the process of publishing a look at the players of each team. So we've started our series also on qualifying for the 2026 World Cup. So check the show notes for links to those.
Okay, so without delay, let's get into the 4 teams of Group E of the African Cup Finals.
Right, so let's begin with Tunisia. And I will do kind of a summary of their longer history, and Kiara will do a look at their recent performance. So in terms of strength, Tunisia is a first to second tier team. In their regularity in reaching the World Cup, they are a top tier team, having been at the finals 6 times. This consists of their World Cup qualification in 1978, 3 in a row from 1998 to 2006, and then 2 recent appearances. However, they have never passed a group stage. In African Cup play, they finished in the top 4 6 times, with second place finishes in 1965 and 1996, and a single title win when they hosted in 2004. But they've struggled since, usually reaching the quarterfinals. Although 4th place in 2019 was their best finish over what is generally a second-tier period. They delved even lower earlier when they failed to reach 5 tournaments in a row from 1984 to 1992, and they had a similar run from 1968 to 1974, although that was due mostly to not entering.
Looking at their recent performance, prior to reaching the World Cup in 2018, they had a long period that was not so much weak, but unglorious. They came close to reaching the World Cup and usually finished at the quarterfinal stage of the African Cup, reaching it consistently. But that World Cup qualification was followed by a 4th place finish in the 2019 African Cup, their best result since 2004, and then by another World Cup qualification. It still lacks glory as they were knocked out at the group stage of the World Cup, but it is an improvement in their recent record. Second place in the 2021 Arab Cup and another World Cup qualification in 2022 are maintaining that higher level.
All right, and we move on to team number 2, Mali. So in terms of strength, Mali is a 3rd-tier team in World Cup and in early African Cup play, but a 2nd-tier team in African Cup play since the turn of the century. They've never reached a World Cup, and their weakness there is really inconsistent with their African Cup record. From 2002, their results in the African Cup improved, but only in 2014 did their World Cup record catch up with competitive performances that saw them finishing in the top half of the table. African Cup play, as we said, had been weak from their first entry in 1965 to 2000, reaching the finals only once during that period in 1972, although they did make the best of that with a second place finish. Their improvement from 2002 has seen them qualify with remarkable consistency, failing to do so only once in 2006. And even that result was actually based on their World Cup qualifying campaign rather than African Cup qualifying. As in 1972, they have impressed once reaching the Cup, not only passing the group stage more than half the time, but finishing in the top four 4 times. That's 2 third-place finishes in 2012 and 2013, which make up their best recent results.
Yeah, looking at their recent performance, they have suffered a bit of a lull after those 2 third-place African Cup finishes that you mentioned in 2012 and 2013, reaching only the group stage of the next 2 tournaments and regressing back to a weak campaign in the 2018 World Cup. But since then, they have swung upward by passing the group stage of the African Cup, reaching the semifinals of the West African Locality Cup, the WAFU Cup, and that was their best ever finish in the competition, and earning their best World Cup result in 2022, reaching the final playoff and finally looking like a second-tier team in that competition.
All right. Well, our third team is South Africa. And in terms of strength, South Africa came out of the apartheid ban as a top-tier team in Africa, but have dwindled to second and sometimes even third tier. They won the second African Cup that they entered in 1996, and if hosting seemed to be the reason for that win, a second-place finish in 1998 showed otherwise. They remained strong, but declined steadily all the way to 2010, where they failed to even reach the African Cup. That strong period also saw them reach 3 of the 4 World Cups from 1998 to 2010. It was by dint of hosting in 2010, and their decline was evident on the world stage as they became the first host ever to fail to pass the group stage. They have failed to reach the World Cup since then and actually have not even come close. African Cup does show some recovery with 2 quarterfinal finishes since 2010, but they've only reached 3 of the 7 editions of the Cup. Their local cup, that's the COSAFA Cup, or the South African Locality, that sees the same pattern since 2010. Despite being perennial hosts and nominally the strongest team in the region, they've reached the final only twice in the 9 editions since 2010, although they did win the title on both of those occasions.
Looking at their recent performance, though they have declined to the level of a second-tier team over the past 20 years, they have had some successes, 2 quarterfinal finishes in African Cups since 2010, and a regional title in 2021. They're also a bit unlucky, having been thwarted at the last steps in several campaigns, almost to a comical degree. They seem to be on the rise with the quarterfinal finish in the 2019 African Cup, where they gloried in knocking out host Egypt, but suffered a late losing goal to Nigeria at the end of a competitive match. They've also suffered some misfortune after respectively strong campaigns in both 2021 and 2022. They're the China of Africa, repeatedly disappointing, but with a sense, thanks in part to a flourishing national league, that they could emerge and become the continental powerhouse they hope to be.
All right, and we move on to our 4th team, which is Namibia. In terms of strength, Namibia is a third-tier team, though they have had some shows of second-tier power. They've never come close to reaching the World Cup, never finishing even in the top half of the main qualifying group there. They have reached the odd African Cup, doing so every 10 years with regularity, actually, in 1998, 2008, and 2019, the latter aided by the tournament expanding from 16 to 24 teams. At the local level, they are an average team in a largely third-tier region and generally get knocked out of the COSAFA Cup. That's the same as South Africa, the South African Locality. they generally get knocked out at the group stage or the quarterfinal stage. However, they earned second place in 2 of the first 3 tournaments. That was in the mid-90s. And again, recently, as well as winning their only title in 2015.
Looking at their recent performance, a slight improvement has seen them finishing 3rd rather than last in recent qualifying campaigns. In 2019 and 2023, it was 2nd in the group, which was enough to win passage to the expanded African Cups. Their 2nd place finish in the local COSAFA Cup in 2022 was their best result since that 2015 title, although it was followed by a group stage exit in the following edition. They remain a 3rd-tier team, but a bit more competitive within that range.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of the summaries and our look at the recent form of the teams.
Now we pass you over to Connor and Kevin's discussion of the prospects of these teams.
And I'll begin the discussion by asking you whether you generally agree with the position of the teams here.
Well, the rankings show a clear separation between all of the teams in both systems, between Tunisia, Mali, South Africa, and Namibia. And I have to say, I probably disagree a little bit. I think Mali and Tunisia are much closer than the ranking suggests, and that partly goes on their history and their recent meetings. Yes, Tunisia got to the World Cup and did well in the Arab Cup, so I don't want to take anything away from them, but I think they're perhaps a little bit overestimated here. We mentioned kind of a sharp increase in their rankings, especially in ELO, where they were often around kind of 40s and 50s, so much closer to Mali, and I think that's probably a little bit more representative of the distance between the teams.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And you're right. You reminded me of the Arab Cup performance, which was quite good there. Otherwise, I feel Tunisia is a bit less convincing than their rankings suggest. They probably got huge points from that win over France in the World Cup, beating a World Cup finalist there.
Yeah.
And we saw how close it was between Mali and them in the qualification for that cup. So even if we just do go on the head-to-head between Mali and Tunisia, it suggests a pretty close battle for top spot there.
And on top of that, Mali have been pretty consistent. Obviously unlucky to lose in the World Cup playoff against Tunisia, but they've put together a string of really solid World Cup and African Cup qualifying campaign. So I think they come into this in good form, and I think they'll be quite competitive at the top of this table.
Yeah, I do too. I see it as a bit of a toss-up between those two, even though the rankings don't really suggest that. If you're ready to move on, would you say South Africa can join them in that battle at the top?
Possibly. I see them probably closer to the top than to Namibia at the bottom. South Africa have put together some okay campaigns, kind of falling at the last hurdle, as we kind of mentioned. I don't see them probably as complete a team, or really with the recent history to prove their competitiveness to the same degree that Mali and Tunisia have. So I see them as a little bit of a step below these two teams. But I'm not sure if you agree with me, or whether you think that they could be pushing for first place in this group.
Well, in response to the last question, I think they could. They have the potential to do it. We saw the population is much bigger than these other teams, and they're a decent soccer country. They have a good league. So I think they have the potential, but they remind me a bit of China, where they have potential. They should be doing much better than they are, but somehow they never seem to get around to doing it after 2010 at least. And if you were to make an argument that South Africa is going to be in the mix for the top team or for the top spot here, my response would be I'll believe it when I see it, because I think probably like South African fans, they're not holding their breath because they're a bit jaded with South Africa's continuous kind of failure to make it, as you say, even at the last hurdle. But they're just not getting the job done.
Yeah, and I think that's it. They haven't quite proven it in recent years, including failing to qualify for the last cup. That they're kind of ready to go back to that consistent second tier or even first tier level where they have been in the past. So I think their ranking, especially relative to Tunisia and Mali, is kind of correct. But that said, they're not that far behind. They're 16 points behind Mali, which is not that many. And I think Tunisia, they're closer than the ranking suggests. So yeah, it's possible, but I think Mali and Tunisia are a bit more proven at this level.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They are more proven. I mean, we saw South Africa can do well. They beat the host Egypt in the was that 2019, I guess, and came even close in the quarterfinals in a game against Nigeria. So they certainly have the potential. But we also saw most recently, a good campaign in reaching this cup, but then a lapse in the home game with Liberia. That seems to trip them up. So, I mean, honestly, I don't want to be ironic here, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see them kind of beat Tunisia and tie Mali or something and then lose to Namibia in the third game kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I do think South Africa is Namibia's best chance for points here. Other games are not totally out of the question, but I think they come in as definitely the weakest team. The South Africa game is interesting given that they've met before and given their, geographical and kind of intertwined histories. But yeah, I would be very surprised to see Namibia finish anything other than last place, even if they do manage to get a win, as they've done in some previous, or a point as they've done in some previous cups.
Yeah, I got to agree with you there. I'm kind of hoping for them. I usually root for the underdog, and I think they do have a chance against South Africa. Not sure how relevant it is, but they did tie them in the 2023 COSAFA Cup. And if we look at Namibia's history in the final, they usually eke out a point somewhere along the way. And as you say, that could be against South Africa here. But I would be surprised to see them challenging beyond that. In fact, I'd say the best that they could do here would be kind of as a spoiler team, maybe take a point off a team that influences their campaign.
Yeah. Do you think there's two teams with Mali and South Africa, or would you not kind of put South Africa quite in that level?
No, I agree with what you said about South Africa, in that I'd have to kind of see it to really accept that. But I think what we have right here is the correct ranking. But I think they do have the potential, if they up their game a bit, they have the potential to be in the mix here. But again, I wouldn't kind of predict it.
Yeah.
That was good. In terms of the group, how do you see these teams doing in terms of the overall tournament? Do you see any semi-finalists amongst the teams here?
I don't hear. Mali were knocked out at the round of 16 last time on penalty. So I think they, so close to the World Cup, I think they can get to the quarterfinals. But that's probably as far as I see them going. And then for Tunisia, I mean, they did one better. They actually got to the quarterfinals last time. And I think they do well to reach that again. So realistically, I think the quarterfinals is kind of the limit. If South Africa got out, I kind of see them going out at the round of 16, unless they were able to pull kind of another big upset.
Yeah, Tunisia did finish fourth in 2019, but as I've said, kind of with the World Cup, I just find them a bit unconvincing in that I wouldn't kind of see them as a power. Like, yes, they're going to reach the semi-finals because they're such a great team. I could see them reaching the quarterfinals, which seems to be their standard finish. Mali, on the other hand, once they get past the group stage, they've kind of done better than expected, a bit like Burkina Faso there. No way, you feel?
I think it's possible. I think Mali are actually quite a good team. I think I'm kind of excited for them. I think they, could perhaps be a bit of a dark horse. Yeah, I think they could get past the quarterfinal, but I think they could go on a bit of a run here. They finished ahead of Tunisia in the 2021 African Cup when these two teams were grouped together, 4 points ahead of them, in fact. And then really were kind of stalled with a penalty shootout loss in the round of 16. So I think Mali could go on a bit of a run this time. And I guess for Tunisia, they've proven themselves a difficult team to beat and a difficult team to score against on top of that. So that defensive record, if it stays true again, that could kind of see them progress a little bit deeper in the tournament.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to say, just my sense is that I think Mali has the potential to go a bit deeper into the tournament than Tunisia have, even though I don't necessarily see them as a stronger team overall. We both agreed that they're fairly even. But, you know, even though we said this was a fairly strong group, three of them coming from the third place slot in their pot and one of them coming from the top slot, we should be saying one of them is a semi-finalist. But yeah, I don't really see it. I think Mali have the potential, but it would be a bit of a surprise if they did, or if any of the teams did.
I agree. I don't see any of these teams reaching the Final Four, despite coming from kind of good positions within their pots. I think it's a bit too much to ask of any of them.
Yeah. Okay, well, I got to say, I'm a little tired of your hemming and hawing here. And I really wish in the podcast you would be firm and lay down your prediction for this group.
I'm going to say Mali first. I think they have a good shot at winning this group, as they did, again, finishing ahead of Tunisia last time. So I think Mali will finish first. I think Tunisia will be second and South Africa third, and then Namibia fourth. You know, I don't really see any other fate for Namibia. I think the other three teams could be in a bit of a mix-up, but Mali, Tunisia, South Africa, Namibia is what I'm saying.
Okay, well, South Africa, I believe they went through as the last third-place team. Was that in 2019?
Yeah, they went through with just one win, actually.
All right. So do you see that potential here, the third-place team making it through?
Possibly. But I also think that if South Africa underperforms a little bit, they could be susceptible to a tie from Namibia, who have got points in two of their three previous cups. So I'm not confident enough to say for sure that they'll go through.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it would be the teams beating up on Namibia for all three of them to pass through.
Yeah.
And as you said, I'm not sure Namibia is quite that weak that they'll be beaten in all three games. Although I think in 2019 they were.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, now I have to fix my own humming and hawing over this group, and I thought I was going to be controversial by saying that I saw Mali as coming out as the winner of the group. They did in 2021. There, and not necessarily that that's really representative. It's been close with Tunisia, so I think either one of them could win the group. But you've mentioned kind of Mali's good, convincing campaign, so I just see them as a little bit more convincing than Tunisia. So as much as it bothers me to agree with you, Connor, I am going to agree and say Mali, Tunisia, South Africa, and Namibia.
All right. Well, we're both calling, predicting Mali to rise. So we'll see if that's true, or whether we'll stick close to the pot order, or something entirely different.
Great. Well, good talking to you about this, Connor, and that leaves us with just Group F to do. We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the media cast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We would like to thank Pixabay and Alexei Ivanov of Mappa Music for the wonderful background music accompanying this media cast.